Have Ferrari made a terrible mistake that regardless of their impressive on-track performance, the off-track stuff could easily derail it? Well, perhaps. But one thing's for sure, whoever decided to leak the Hamilton-Ferrari news early is probably Italy's least favourite person right now. I already talked about this briefly in my video earlier this week, about why Lewis Hamilton walked out of his media engagements when asked about whether or not he was excited about Ferrari's performance. You know, because their car is inherently faster than the Mercedes car. You can go and watch that video for that perspective from Lewis's point of view. But here, we're going to be talking about it from Ferrari's point of view, and also really pay tribute to the work that Fred Vasseur has done since he joined as the team principal at the end of 2022. Because Ferrari, ever since then, have been on the upside. Things have been looking really positive for Ferrari. For years, the Scuderia have been known for having a fairly good car, which can easily contend for second place in the Constructors, unless of course you're talking about 2020, which was an absolute disaster, their worst season in decades. One thing really scuppered Ferrari's chances, and it happened quite a lot: pit stops and pit strategies. I grew up being a Ferrari supporter back in the 2000s, and their pit strategies and pit calls under the hands of Ross Brawn were practically bulletproof. But the pit stops would be the place where Ferrari would become infamous for being bad at. They would be seen as clowns, not being able to get it right, there would be a mistake, or the overall strategy itself would be absolutely awful. Like what we saw at Monaco in 2022 when it really came to a head. There was a really big chance that Charles Leclerc could have had a chance at winning his home race, the only Monegasque to even come close. It all fell apart, and even though he did finish fourth, it was his best Monaco result, it could have easily been so much more. Then reliability and strategy issues all round set about unravelling any chance of a championship campaign, and Red Bull were able to figure out their weight deficiencies and end up with a car that was all dominating. And that being the case for the next 2 years, whilst all of the other teams around them were scrabbling to try and find something the equivalent of Red Bull, and then not finding it, and then have to do it all over again for 2024. Now though, things are looking quite stable for Ferrari. Sure, in 2023 it wasn't all that clear, but this year very much so. And it all seems to have stemmed from a removal of a certain person within the pit strategy group. Him now being cast off back to the factory in Maranello, and that of course is Ignacio Rueda. Sorry if I get the pronunciation wrong. After just 4 races, the change in leadership in that regard and management overall seemingly has paid off. It also showed that the SF24 was so good of a car that it could pull off what was seen by many as the alternate strategy. One that would be very unlikely to work in any shape or form, but with Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, it did. But of course, as we know, it could have easily been so much more. We have seen a markedly big improvement in Ferrari in just 6 months. They have gained in race pace so much, being able to leap past McLaren, who were brilliant this time out last year, and get even closer to Red Bull, who made gains themselves, but not nearly as much gains as Ferrari had. Them being able to claw the gap between the Milton Keynes team and them by about half a second or so. And that's just enough to be able to make Red Bull and Max Verstappen work that little bit harder. Of course, Red Bull and Max Verstappen, it's the most potent combination on the grid, and it's continuing to be the favourite, but at least there's a little bit more of a chance that the gaps between them and the rest of the pack will be at least a little bit smaller. And maybe in 2025, diminishing returns and whatnot at Red Bull, it could be even closer. Ferrari are having a fantastic start to the year, and whilst they're not looking likely to beat Red Bull on the regular, they can at least show up, and when they do have a falter, the Milton Keynes team, Ferrari can easily step in and become the best team themselves. They've been able to knock back McLaren into 3rd place, whereas the MCL60 late on in 2023 could easily be seen as the fastest car at some circuits. Again, not the fastest combination though, Max in the RB19, still the best. So with a car that is looking increasingly solid and quite certainly the 2nd fastest car with moments of brilliance, you would think that Ferrari would be thrilled to bits. That 2024 would be an absolutely flawless year, one that Ferrari could be proud of. Fred Vasseur's work fully coming online finally after a bit of a shaky start. Him being able to instill a calmer atmosphere on the pit wall, and that is something that has really been lacking at the Scuderia, which many people didn't really notice and only really noticed when it was put into sharp relief. Yeah, being calm and chill does make a difference, as Fred says here. Part of this, the calmness by the way, is the strategy. Part of it is the time management, because when you have the pace, it's easier to manage situations. This is coming with confidence. It's much more calm on the pit wall, and it's the best way to take a good decision and everything is going in the same direction, and it's a smooth environment. When you start to go in the right direction, everyone is pushing, everyone is more calm, everyone is more confident. It's the opposite when you have a negative spiral. We made a good step with the car during the winter, and even the last part of last year. Everybody is much more confident in the team and more calm. We are doing a good job together. Those two words are very important, my friend. Calm and confident. That's how you can pretty much sum up Fred Vasseur and Ferrari right now. They are as cool as a Narain Karthikeyan. Look back a decade or so, Ferrari on paper could make a pretty good car, especially when you go back to 2018 when Ferrari genuinely looked like a very compelling contender for the likes of Mercedes, and of course, as we know, it didn't turn out that way. They certainly had a very strong start to their campaign, which of course faltered completely by the time you got to Hockenheim when Sebastian Vettel infamously came off the track and ended up in the barrier and retiring, and thusly ending his championship campaign for a 5th title, and then practically gifting Lewis Hamilton his 5th world title. Ferrari for the longest time were in a bit of a flap, especially in the Maurizio Arrivabene years. He seemed to be very much a tyrant of sorts, and you felt like any wrong move could easily send him into an absolute spiral. And that negative spiral that Vasseur was talking about is really genuine. You really need to have a calm and confident atmosphere if you really want to do well. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. And it's all the more galling because Valtteri Bottas at that time in 2018 was having a mardy of a season right before he grew a beard and became Bottas 2.0. Ferrari should have been able to capitalize on that, but sadly, because of all of the stuff going on behind the scenes, it didn't turn out that way. There was just something that would be spoiling the party. Either the car was inconsistent, or it was unreliable, or the team itself was not being able to maximize the car properly, the pit stops would easily go wrong, the pit strategies themselves would be really questionable, the management itself becoming increasingly fractious with the position of team principals soon becoming a revolving door, 3 of them in 5 years, which for a major team like Ferrari is incredibly disruptive. With Fred arriving, having cut his teeth in close quarters at Alfa Romeo and Ferrari being able to get a good read on him, he's now become the 4th non-Italian team principal of the team. Of course, yes, it started off with a bang, literally in Bahrain when the car broke on Charles Leclerc and everyone thought it was going to be more of the same, but as the year progressed, we started to see more and more of Fred's potential, and him being a really confident and really admirable team principal and leader. And then it's got to a place where you feel like they're in good hands, Ferrari. And you especially know that for the fact that on his door, instead of the nameplate reading Mr. Vasseur or something quite formal, it just simply reads Fred. The guy seems completely unflappable. Well, that unflappability might be put to the test when you put a certain British driver amongst the Italian pigeons, that being, of course, Lewis Hamilton. Wait, Law, are you being serious? Are you downing on Lewis Hamilton? What about your inherent British bias? Well, here's a secret for you. Come closer. I don't actually drink tea. But seriously, no, I'm not downing on Lewis Hamilton. I've already talked about his perspective, that how in 2024, he's basically working for a team who's the living embodiment of misery. They are just complete misery guts over at Brackley, and he's working for a team principal who seems to be thinking up of more and more creative ways to say that he's feeling sad right now. Going from punching himself on the nose to saying they're in no man's land. It's really not a fun time to be at Mercedes right now. Hashtag Mercedes. I'm more concerned with the overall motive for acquiring Lewis Hamilton and the timing of it. Ferrari did not intend for this news to come out in February because the fallout of this news has not exactly been glowing. As time has progressed, more and more people have been saying, are you sure that's a really good idea? Because Carlos is really doing well here. And the questions have been mounting up and up and up and up. And that train of thought was really hammered home to me by an Italian driver who used to drive for Ferrari, Ivan Capelli. Take that with a pinch of salt, of course. He claims that Toto Wolff was the one who leaked the news out to the media just a day after he found out himself. Apparently, Lewis hadn't even told his family about the move, not even his brother, and they're incredibly close. In an ideal world, Ferrari would have told the world the news that Lewis Hamilton was going to be joining their team at a place that they would have been able to establish the narrative. Most likely at a Grand Prix that was based in Italy, either the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix or, probably more logically, at Monza. In front of the Tifosi, they would have wheeled out Lewis Hamilton and made the news, and therefore everyone would have been rapturous, and it would have been a sea of passionate admirability. There would have been far less time to really question it or critique it, because it would have been made around the same time as silly season as it usually is. Everyone's thinking about the next season anyway, it wouldn't really cause that much disruption, and everyone's always thinking about where all the drivers are going to go next. It would have been pretty much more of the same. That's when we find out all of the big news stuff, so it would have been pretty much par for the course. But now we've got a situation where the news has been leaked about 2025, months earlier than Ferrari would have liked, and all this is going to do It's just cause a narrative to build up in the background away from Ferrari, and then it would encroach on what Ferrari are able to do. Because if Ferrari are able to do well, then everyone will be thinking, oh brilliant, you'll be able to give Lewis Hamilton his 8th world title. Or if Ferrari falter, then go, oh, are you sure that Lewis Hamilton will want to drive that car? Oh, it's not looking good, is it? And then of course, as you saw, with Lewis Hamilton walking out of that interview, they were asking him a fairly innocuous question, but just badly timed, about, are you excited about driving for Ferrari because they're faster than Mercedes? Now we're getting equally abrasive remarks from the Ferrari boss, him telling reporters to simply look back to his previous answer on the subject and then move on to the next question. I will say, this was a very impressive response. It was very authoritative, it was very calm, it was very measured, and it was also accurate because that week before, he would have given a similar answer, so what would have been the point to have repeated himself? So I will give Fred Vasseur credit because he did handle himself very well. And this just reflects more and more why I absolutely adore this guy as a team principal, because when you look back to Las Vegas, he was equally as standoffish, but in a good way. Because all the stuff that happened with Carlos Sainz's car, it was big news. His car had been massively damaged through no fault of his own. He was angry and he wanted to tell the world about it. He would not have put up with any other question that would have taken away attention from the predicament that he was in. So he said, I don't want to talk about this, I want to talk about this. And yes, he did get a rap on the knuckles from the FIA in Formula 1, but still, you got to admire the guy. He was ballsy. He was fighting Ferrari's corner. That's what a team principal should do. So I am not criticizing what Fred Vasseur said. I'm just saying that this is going to become more and more of an occurrence. We're only 4 races in. We've got months left of the season, my friend. It's only going to get worse. The reactions and responses will get all the more abrasive and aggressive until it gets to the point, I reckon, that either Ferrari or Lewis Hamilton or both parties will tell the media, don't ask about this again, essentially putting in a gag order. But that's only going to make the journalists all the more curious. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, that response. But I think it might be too late anyway, because it's just getting worse and worse and worse, because with every passing day, there are articles, op-eds, takes from all sorts of people, either having been involved with Ferrari or not. They've been former F1 drivers, or they've been pundits, or they've been former team principals. There's always been somebody with an opinion about why they think the choice of bringing in Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari was not the best idea. And it's only going to increase in volume. Even Ferrari's on-track performance won't be able to make the problem go away, because if it's Carlos Sainz getting the results, as he's been able to do so over the past 4 races, and coming back from appendicitis, it's only going to make more and more people go, hang on a minute, why are you doing this? Carlos is really good. More people will be questioning whether or not it was a good idea to invest nearly $500 million in a 7-time world champion who's currently not having the best of times with the team that he instilled a really good reputation with for about a decade. And right now, Carlos Sainz is being made out to be the best thing since sliced bread, freshly baked from the bakery section of Sainsbury's. Or should we have acquired from Sainsbury's the ingredients to make pancakes like Carlos Sainz makes? Because as he says, he's so good. In any case, all of these negative headlines are going to have a knock-on effect in some shape or form. I don't know exactly how it will manifest itself, but it will in some way. The negative spiral that Fred Vasseur was talking about is very, very important. That could easily undo all of the good that Fred Vasseur is trying to instill in the Scuderia. He's been doing an admirable job, and I just get the feeling that the influence of the chairman of Ferrari in trying to acquire Lewis Hamilton in a really big blockbuster deal could easily have stepped on many toes of the Ferrari team itself, because it does seem to be more and more of the case that this came from outside influence away from the F1 team itself. It could easily scupper efforts in trying to mount an even more compelling campaign for 2025, since the RB20 is showing more and more signs of diminishing returns. The RB21 may not be much better, as efforts are looking likely to be able to make a really good car for 2026, but already the rules are looking really, really jittery right now. I might make a video about that later. Those cars are not looking good. But either way, there's going to be efforts to concentrate on that, so maybe Ferrari might sense an opportunity to end this era of Formula 1 with a championship, be it a drivers or constructors. One particular pundit and former F1 driver, Thierry Boutsen, made a point that I found really interesting, and I think it does make a fair lick of sense. Put simply, Boutsen's comments mentioned that these days, the driver alone can no longer drag a team up to the top. That back in the 70s and 80s especially, before aerodynamics became critical, a driver could easily lead a team to glory, and the pecking order would easily change year on year. And when you look back at who won the driver's title in Formula 1 in the 60s, 70s, and then 80s, it does corroborate with what Boutsen says. Before the mid-80s, They keep changing all the time. It either goes between Lotus, Tyrrell, Ferrari, McLaren. It's always changing. There's always a brand new championship leader every single year. Except, of course, when Jack Brabham was around, when he won it consecutively in the late 60s. But when you get to 1984, and Niki Lauda wins his third and final title, and McLaren are able to get the hang of the brand new MP4 monocoque-based design made out of carbon fibre, McLaren go on to practically dominate the rest of the 80s. In fact, they do. All the way through to Ayrton Senna's world title in 1991, when Williams and Nigel Mansell are able to break the streak. And yes, of course, it was broken slightly also by Williams by Nelson Piquet in 1987, but either way, McLaren pretty much had the best combination of driver and car, with brand new technologies, brand new way of going about things thanks to Ron Dennis, and of course, two stonkingly good drivers. It's the complete package we are talking about, what Boutsen is saying. No longer can you have just the driver making up for a probably mediocre or decent car. You need the entire widget to work in your favour if you want to mount a title campaign. That's why we've seen many times with Red Bull, be it last year or this year, that the RB19 and 20 are really good cars, but it's the combination of team, car, driver that makes the entire thing work. What Boutsen might be implying regarding Lewis Hamilton is that he may not necessarily be the right ingredient in being able to instill or manifest a title campaign, especially when you got two drivers who know that car inside and out and have been doing really well with it. Ferrari right now are looking really solid for second place in the Constructors. They were able to leapfrog McLaren without anybody expecting it. They all thought it might have been at least level pegging with the Woking team, but no, they've absolutely just let right past them, considerably so. And that's something really to be commended. Fred Vasseur is the perfect choice of team principal. He's part of the puzzle. The car is also another part of the puzzle. John Elkann and the Ferrari board might think it's Lewis Hamilton, that might be that last piece of the puzzle, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. What Ferrari probably ideally wanted for 2024 was to secure Lewis Hamilton's services, but to keep it under wraps for the longest time. Word would not spread. Sure, there might be rumours about Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari, but they've been knocking around the paddock for about a decade now, so what else is new? The SF24 would be a car that Charles Leclerc could easily outclass Carlos Sainz in, on the regular, with the Spaniard not being able to pull off strategic wonders like he had done in previous seasons. And then of course team orders ensuring that Charles Leclerc is the driver that they fully back, that they establish the culture that they were infamous for in the 2000s especially, that they would be backing one driver, that Charles Leclerc would be their guy, that the SF24 would be the car to give Charles Leclerc all the opportunity that he could to try and at least mount some kind of effort to topple Max Verstappen. Carlos Sainz would be thanked for his services, given a pat on the back, and the Tifosi would love him forever, but he would be told to jog on and go and find a job elsewhere. And then Lewis Hamilton would step in at the end of 2024, get to drive a Ferrari car for the first time at Fiorano, and then everything would be right with the world. Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, not that much time to speculate about it, everyone would be excited just to get on with the proceedings, see what happens at Albert Park in 2025, and all would be well. It would have been the perfect coup, with very little people criticising it. But that has not happened. Instead, the news came about months before Ferrari would have liked to have broken it. The SF24 is a car that is turning out to be good for both drivers instead of one driver in particular, which for any other team would have been fantastic. Not to mention Carlos Sainz is feeling hard done by and is driving angrily, the best he's ever done, and Charles Leclerc has also had a fair share of bad luck, and of course there was that tyre snafu at Suzuka, but he was able to make good with it somewhat and still be in the hunt for the title. But there were still things going against Charles Leclerc's luck. And team orders have turned out to be far more equal than people had expected. Because if Carlos Sainz is doing well, it'd be a really bad look if you decided to undermine him despite the fact that he's getting you points anyway, so it's far more of a headache than Ferrari would have hoped for. And it's the same headache that has continued to have been inflicting them ever since Carlos signed the dotted line in 2021. With both drivers doing really well, it's proving to be derailing the narrative that the chairman John Elkann had thrust upon the Scuderia, eroding ever more the independence that Enzo Ferrari himself had established between carmaker and racing outfit. The questions regarding Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari and what it will be like next year are going to be the fly in the ointment of Ferrari's 2024 campaign. And it's a shame, because this car is looking brilliant. The team itself is looking brilliant. The two drivers, Carlos and Charles, are looking quite solid. Carlos on his day is mesmerizing. Charles Leclerc on his day can be mesmerizing and a really good qualifier. But the thing about that is what Boutsen says, the overall package is looking mighty. And if you can build upon that, it would get even mightier. Why fix something that ain't broke? Ferrari right now are looking great. And with this move of Lewis Hamilton, it's just a shame that it came out too soon. We've got many months to stew over this, and it's going to be a continuous annoyance for Ferrari that could get under their skin. It could affect them on track, hopefully not, but it's just not something that Ferrari wanted, and it's proving to be an even bigger headache than Carlos Sainz driving better than they would have wanted. And if it turns out that Lewis Hamilton's pessimism that he had at Mercedes carries over into Ferrari, it could prove to be, that investment, a really, really bad one. That it might not have been worth it after all. Well, okay, it was worth it in the short term, because it did add $6 billion to Ferrari's bottom line, at least in some part. Something that I talk about more of in this video here, that you can go and watch next, right after this one. Modern technology, eh?